Hello, welcome to Globe Oil. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I am actually at a conference in Colombia in Cartagena. They have been inviting me for the last 20 years, but I have always given preference to Globe Oil Mumbai. This year, as an exception, I decided to go to South America and send a video to Globe Oil Mumbai. South America is suddenly very important in the palm oil field as far as India is concerned. We broke trade and imported palm oil from Colombia as well as Guatemala. And this region is producing more and more palm oil and is emerging as an exporter. So my apologies once again. My congratulations to TEFLAS and to my own home association, the Solvent Extractors Association, of which I am very proud. I am offering my congratulations to the Globe Oil Organizing Committee, led by Sandeep Bajoria for many years, and spearheaded by TEFLAS under the leadership of Kailash Singh, who has done wonders in the last 25 years. Our evergreen Dr. Bharat Bhai Mehta, my colleague Atul Chaturvedi, and our very distinguished SEA President Sanjeev Asthana. He has been a rather lucky president for SEA. And many others. We all work as a team, and I'm very proud of the way the SEA functions. And my apologies once again to my friends in SEA and to all of you for not being here in person. Now, this was a classic Indian road trick or a famous Indian googly bold by Indian importers towards the exporters who were regarding India as a kind of a private monopoly. Indian importers have thrown the supply side of the market into disarray. We have diversified our supply chain by importing more CPO from Thailand, some from CPO from Colombia and Guatemala, and also soybean oil from China, Russia, Egypt, etc. This diversification of the supply chain has jolted the normal exporters who had begun to regard themselves as monopoly suppliers. This has clearly upset the SMEs of those countries and put pressure on their exporters to fight for market share in India. This has led to some worries amongst exporters in Malaysia and Indonesia. Now, let me remind you of my last forecast. I don't speak very often these days, but on 7th of May at Globe Oil Dubai, I made the following forecast. I said between May and November 25, Bursa Malaysia palm futures will weaken and may decline to 3,500 ringgits. I said soya oil has won new markets and the CBOT soybean futures will be strong. And I said that sun oil will always be at a premium to other oils this year, but the US soya oil will become bullish because of the biodiesel regime for 2026. Now, let's compare that with what actually happened. Palm futures declined, but only to 3,700 ringgits. I was too bearish. I was wrong. The US EPA announcement of 11th June on 26 and 27 biodiesel regime was very bullish. The RVOs announced were 67% higher than the previous year. Soya oil has continued to gain market share as Indonesia has stepped up her biodiesel program with move to B40 and various other restrictions. So that's what actually happened. There were some new developments in 2025. The USA-China trade impasse has hurt US exports of soybeans. Crush in China has benefited, but as a result of the better crush, they have had surplus soybean oil. What have they done? They have shipped it to India. The same story in other meal and meat consuming countries like Egypt, Iraq, etc. The basic reason was soybeans have been cheap and crush margins have been attractive. Let us review palm oil in 2025. Palm oil production recovery in Malaysia and Indonesia was not impressive. Palm trees are aging, there is almost no expansion of acreage, and there has been very little replanting of the oldest trees. When BMD futures declined and went down to 3,700 ringgits, palm became competitive because soya oil also went up side by side and it regained some market share. That was the story of 25. But we were always under the shadow of President Trump. President Trump and his tariffs and trade policies are having a big effect on veg oils. The Trump EPA announcement for 26 and 27 biofuel policy is still incomplete. They have announced big mandates, then they have used the small refinery exemption. They are yet to decide how much of those exemptions they will reload onto 26-27 mandates, and they have to decide whether imported feedstock used to make US biodiesel will qualify for incentives. If it does not qualify for incentives, the US producers have no choice but to use US soybean oil, and that will be very bullish for soya oil. What jolted the market in 25? Quiet but significant shipments of soya oil from China to India. Shipments of CPO from Colombia and Guatemala to India. Big exports of CPO in this month, September, from Thailand to India, as much as 175,000 tons. And soya oil exports from Russia, Iraq, Egypt, etc. to India. So that was the big jolt in the market. Indonesia has also played a role. Indonesia is very important in the palm market, and it has played a very critical role. I call it a disruptor. Not in a bad sense, in a good sense, but there are downsides also. Indonesia has taken on the mantle of being a disruptor in the palm market. First, by very boldly going to B20. Then, by removing the subsidy on all non-public sector organization palm biodiesel consumption. A very bold decision which I call a master stroke. That means only the private sector consumption of biodiesel is subsidized. Public sector is not, public sector is subsidized, private sector is not subsidized. Originally it was 50-50, now they have tweaked it further, so 60% of Indonesian palm biodiesel is now consumed without any subsidy. A landmark achievement for which the Indonesian government needs to be credited. But Indonesia has also been doing some things which are a bit questionable. Indonesia is seizing and nationalizing plantation land which it deems as being illegally planted. Now this step, I am not going into the merits of the step, but I am saying that this step is affecting and will damage the productivity of the seized lands. Because naturally you are moving land from private sector into the cooperative sector. The private sector is always more efficient, cares more, invest more, and harvest more. Cooperatives are generally a little slow in these things. So, Indonesia must be careful. President Prabowo must instead, I feel, lift the moratorium and let private plantations invest, plant, and grow. What is the current position in Indonesia? About 1.5 million hectares of seized plantation land has been given to a cooperative called PT Agrinas to manage. Another 1.8 million hectares could be seized in the foreseeable future. So almost 3 million hectares is in problem. These actions will affect productivity and they will hurt palm oil production in 2026. Probably second half, most probably first half as well. Now, what is the palm outlook for 2026? I expect palm production to be higher by just 1 million tons. Even that may or may not happen. 1 million tons in 25-26. It may not happen if the Indonesian seizures and all have a bad effect. B40 in Indonesia has stabilized. There is talk of B50, but it is still at the trial stage. So B50 implementation will have to wait until 2027. People are talking of B45 and all that. But the more palm oil is diverted to biodiesel in Indonesia, the less palm oil will be available for export to India. Indonesia has done very well to remove the subsidy, as I said, on non-public sector consumption of biodiesel, and they need to be congratulated for that. Mind you, non-edible demand for palm, for oleochemicals and biodiesel is expanding. If Indonesia goes to B50, there will be shortages of palm oil and prices will rocket. Indonesia needs to lift the moratorium on new palm plantations. What is the moratorium? Under pressure from Norway and EU, Indonesia put a stop on development of new plantations in the interest of subsidies, sustainability, prevention of forest degradation, etc. This led to a stagnation of palm oil production. Now Indonesia needs to lift the moratorium and allow new sustainable plantations. Watch my words, new sustainable plantations, so that we preserve the planet, we preserve the environment, and yet we create prosperity. Let us review the other oil-bearing seeds, rapeseed. Will canola feedstock in US biofuels be eligible for incentives? Canola oil and seed can come into the US almost duty-free under the USMCA. But will that feedstock used in making US biodiesel be eligible for incentives, subsidies? That is important. If not, biodiesel producers will have to use more soybean oil. Now there is a trade war between Canada and China, and that has hurt Canadian exports of canola to China. So they have to go into the US. The question is, will they be eligible for subsidies? Indian mustard oil prices are very high in 2025, and India, I am sure, will plant more mustard this year. At this juncture, I congratulate the Solvent Extractors Association on its project Mustard. Bottle farms, education being spread to spread the gospel of mustard cultivation, particularly in the northern part of India. And I am very proud that what SEA is doing, sponsored and funded entirely by private sector companies like our own company Godrej or Adani Wilmar, wonderful work being done for the country, for the industry, all credit to SEA. And I think the result will be seen in even greater planting of mustard seed next year. The demand for rape oil in Europe depends upon how much used cooking oil and pome or palm oil mill effluent is allowed to be imported into the United States. Because if it cannot go to USA, it will go to Europe. And if it comes to Europe, Europe will need less rape oil. If it is allowed to go into the US, less will come to Europe. Europe will have to use more rape oil in biodiesel. So these are all very interlinked and we need to pay attention to them. We come to soya. Soya oil futures on CBOT are currently trading in anticipation of concrete news on the US biofuel regime for 2026. I have explained that to you earlier. The Trump administration needs to do something for US soybean farmers. Soybean farmers are not in a good place. They are selling soybeans at $10 a bushel. Under Obama, in the early part, they were getting $14 a bushel. Under Biden in 2022, they got $18 a bushel. And yet soybean farmers love President Donald Trump. So he will have to do something for them in the absence of a trade deal with China. And my guess is that he will do it in the form of a higher biodiesel regime and make the price of soybean oil drag up the price of soybeans. So my sense is to remain bullish on soya oil. The Brazilian biodiesel mandate has also been increased from 14% to 15%, and Brazil may export very little soya oil in the late season. And soya oil flat price for 2026 positions makes it very competitive against palm oil again, and soya oil will gain market share. That is for a fact. Let us look at sunflower seed. Current sunseed crops 25-26 in the Black Sea region and in Argentina are bigger than last year. Sun oil prices in US dollars, mind you, will gain if the local currencies of Russia and Ukraine become stronger after a ceasefire. Right now the war is going on, the currencies are depressed. But if the currencies become stronger, the dollar price of sun oil will go up. So we must bear that in mind if there is a ceasefire. Sun oil right now is losing market share even otherwise because its price is higher than soya and palm. Once palm and soya prices begin to rise, as I expect in early 26, sun oil may become more competitive. But we have to watch. If there is a ceasefire and local currencies rise, sun oil will also rise. So it's a difficult situation. Let us look at China. China has played her cards very skillfully in trade negotiations with Brazil Trump. China's consumption of veg oils in 2026 is unlikely to be higher. And Chinese exports of soya oil will depend on soybeans remaining cheap. That means very little or no export of US soybeans to China. Then soybeans remain depressed. Chinese can buy cheap soybeans, they can crush them, they can export soya oil. If they start buying soybeans in the US, soybean prices go up, crush margins go down. So this is a complex situation. We come to India, and as I told you, the great Indian rope trick, the Indian googly has worked extremely well because it has kept the lid on palm oil futures and soya oil futures because we have diversified our suppliers. India has also very cleverly used import duties to control food price inflation. Today the prices of pulses in India, tur dal for example, and even cooking oil are very reasonable and under control thanks to some very judicious operation by the Indian government, and they must be complimented for that. I believe that the Indian import of palm in 2026 will rise after many years of decline, and I will show you how. And also the total import of vegetable oil will rise next year. Consumption is rising. Here is my estimate of imports for next year, 25-26. Soya oil, I expect them to remain the same at 5 million tons. But look where they were in 12, 13, 14 years ago, only 1 million tons. Palm was 8.2 in 14 years ago. Last year it was again the same 8.2. But now I expect it to go up by 1 million tons next year. Sun oil has also gone up, it will stay at about 2.7. Total imports will rise from 16.3 to about 17.1. These are my best estimates as of now. India will have large stocks of local oil seeds which it will not be able to crush because of absence of crush margins and low demand for Indian meal in export markets. Now we come to the world, the macro picture. World energy demand grew in 24-25 by 3 million tons. No, 25-26 we expect this demand to grow by 4 million tons because of capacity and usage for biodiesel expanding in USA, Brazil and Indonesia being the main. World food demand increases every year by 3 million tons. Last year, because of higher prices, it grew by only 2 million tons. We expect food demand to grow by another 2 million tons in 25-26. So net, world demand will go up from 5 million tons last year to 6 million tons next year. And look how that shapes the incremental supply and demand. This is how you arrive at price outlook. Last year, supply went up by 3 million, demand went up by 5 million. We had a deficit. This year, again, supply goes up by 4 million, mainly because there is hardly any growth in palm oil, 1 million tons only. In fact, the other growth comes from sunflower oil. Demand goes up by 6 million. So again, we have a deficit. Deficits 2 years in a row are bound to have an effect on price. Why this bullish scenario? Good question. Palm oil production has been flat. Palm oil productivity growth is nil or negative. Too much uncertainty in Indonesia because of the seizures, the nationalization, and even in other parts of the world, acreage of soya, sun and grape is not expanding because oilseed prices are not attractive. Agriculture is not profitable. Average age of farmers is rising with each year in almost all countries. Agriculture is not profitable and relies on government subsidies. Farming is not an attractive vocation, and food habits are changing. These are the reasons why agriculture is not profitable. So, what are the price outlook factors? The biggest factor is palm oil production is flat. Palm oil production is not contributing 2-3 million tons extra every year. There is little growth in oilseed production for other oilseeds. There is resistance to genetically modified seeds, particularly in our own country, which means productivity is not improving, it is actually digressing. There are bigger and bigger biodiesel mandates. Now there will come the growth of sustainable aircraft fuel, SAF. Even India is going to manufacture sustainable aircraft fuel. And finally, the trajectory of the US dollar and US interest rates. Why is the US dollar important? Because the US dollar index, the DXY, has been falling. It has already fallen in the last 1 year from an index of 110 to an index of 98 currently, 97, 98. It could keep falling more. If the Federal Reserve reduces the US interest rates, the dollar is likely to fall further. And a falling dollar is always resultant in higher commodity prices. So my price outlook for next year, I expect palm futures on the BMP third month to trade sideways during the peak production months of September, October and November. The current sell-off has been very healthy for the market. BMP futures will rise as the peak palm production season ends and will exceed 5,000 ringgits by November, December. January to March 26 will be very bullish for palm futures because you have Chinese New Year, you have Ramzan right in February. So low season, low production, too many holidays, and because of festivals, very good demand. 5,500 ringgits is possible with early Ramzan in 2026. Soya oil futures in CBOT will remain strong due to US biodiesel, and CBOT soya oil futures can go up to 70 cents. While CBOT soya oil futures will be strong, cash basis in South America may not be as weak as on previous occasions. As a result of higher soya and palm prices, sun oil may become more competitive once again around the middle of 2026. But if you have peace and ceasefire, local currencies in Ukraine and Russia may rise and sun oil may rise with them. Be careful. All these factors will be affected by actions of President Trump and the US Federal Reserve, particularly if they keep cutting interest rates. Now we look at lauric oils. Lauric oils are more politically neutral. Coconut oil production is anemic and prices should remain well above USD 2000 safer oil. Palm kernel oil prices will be cheaper than CNO, but new oleochemical capacity will tighten the availability of palm kernel oil considerably. One final word on EUDR. This is the deforestation measure in the EU. I believe the EU will have to revise the current EUDR framework. Implementation of EUDR should be postponed and should be reviewed. And finally, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, once again my apologies for not being here in person, but I hope you had a very good view of my price outlook. The biggest price factor is going to be US biodiesel policy. Supplies in 2026 do not look comfortable. The outlook for 2026 is clearly bullish. Particularly keep an eye on the US dollar. Weak dollar means high commodity prices. So with those words, ladies and gentlemen, I take your leave and I wish you good luck and God bless. And once again, sorry for not being with you in